everyone, and thank you for that warm introduction. This is a bit of a full circle moment for me. I grew up reading all about Phyllis Schlafly and idolizing the work that the Eagle Forum does, and so now to stand before you is such an honor. Just this fantastic moment for my young self to imagine. But tonight we obviously come at this issue in an incredibly dark moment in the history of conservatism, in the history of our nation. And I am reminded more than ever that ideas have consequences. And we are not fighting just against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, over the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And Charlie, more than so many people in our generation, stood firm on the gospel of Jesus Christ, in his love for the United States and his patriotic spirit, and was an unrelenting defender of life from the moment of conception. It is not lost on me tonight that I am honored to join you all at this 53rd annual conference to discuss that very topic of life, all while we're mourning his death. And yet we do not mourn as those who have no hope, but as those who have died with and will rise again with Jesus Christ, who is the resurrection and the life. And so that is the encouragement that we hold on to, and that is the vision that we look forward to as we dive into this topic tonight. And so I believe that now more than ever, it is essential for conservatives, for Christians in the United States, to stand firm as we promote life and defend the goodness of the family. For decades now, Christians have been the backbone of the pro-life movement, and it's time to extend that fight further into the realm of holistic fertility and the protection of life, including those human embryos who were created in IVF. And as Ms. Carpenter said at the beginning, we're at this incredible moment where when we talk about the family or fertility or life, we must necessarily talk about these rapidly developing technologies that can either help our understanding of what it means to be human or completely eviscerate it with genetic editing and designer babies, surrogacy that commercializes the womb, and practices that destroy human embryos, treating it like a byproduct rather than the life that it is. And so the pro-life movement in the United States has undergone transformative shifts since the Supreme Court's landmark decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization, which overturned Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. For nearly half a century, the pro-life movement had focused on judicial strategies to protect life, fostering a public understanding of fetal personhood from fertilization, and establishing numerous pregnancy care centers across the United States. And so by and large, scholars focused on the judicial fight while also emphasizing a pro-family framework that combined protections for the unborn with material support for families. And yet we find ourselves at this fascinating cultural moment that is exemplified by the Make America Healthy Again platform that offers an even more innovative path forward. And so I believe that with the right focus and leadership, this vision could advance a comprehensive culture of life that transcends the traditional political groups that we have grown up with over the years and promote a holistic view of reproductive health. And for too many years, if you hear the term reproductive health, you think abortion, because that's what it's been reduced down to. And for many people, engaging in any sort of healthcare has been dominated by big pharma and one-size-fits-all solutions that don't take into account you, your particular history, your past, your root causes, and actually trying to heal you, not just give you solutions to suppress it. And unfortunately, that has been the typical approach that we've seen, especially when it comes to questions of fertility and pregnancy, whether that's pushing abortion or whether that's treating IVF or in vitro fertilization as the one-stop shop for fertility care. So before we sort of dive in, as you know, declining birth rates have been declining across the United States. We're not having nearly as many babies as we used to. And it's reaching the point where there are serious questions about how we'll support ourselves in the future, both economically, with elder care, with our GDP, and more. And beyond that, we also have rising rates and a focus on the rising rates of infertility in the United States, with millions of men and women, about 1 in 6 or 1 in 5, depending on the study, who desperately want to have children and yet are struggling to do so. And so in many cases, IVF is offered as the solution, that if you're struggling with infertility, IVF is the way to go. And frankly, until about 2024, that was the extent of the conversation. So I wanted to walk you through just a little bit of the recent history. So back in 2022, I joined Heritage weeks before the Dobbs decision, stood out front the Supreme Court, barely pregnant with our first daughter, and standing in awe of this incredible moment that we were at. And when I joined Heritage, I had a meeting with Dr. Richards, with Roger Severino, with a few others, and I pitched them on this novel idea that at Heritage, there was no one solely focused on reproductive technology, IVF, surrogacy, designer babies. And then I said back in 2022, trust me, guys, this is going to become a really big deal. I think we should start tackling this. And thankfully, they agreed. So they brought me on and we started building out our platform on IVF and surrogacy and all of these major issues. And then in early 2024, the Alabama Supreme Court decision happened, ruling that in the case of negligence on the part of doctors, that frozen embryos were considered persons. Now, this was completely overblown and sparked what can only be said a national debate during the presidential election, with everyone in Congress, especially on the federal level, tripping over themselves to say, without any qualifications, we are 100% pro-life, 100% pro-IVF, and pro-woman. And that was about the extent of the debate. And yet, and it's understandable, right? Because in the rush to affirm IVF, what many people were rightly doing is saying, hey, we know couples who have struggled with infertility. We ourselves have used IVF. We know children who were born from IVF. And without a doubt, each of those children born are a gift from God, right? This is not at all a reflection on that child's worth and dignity and goodness. But it did prompt a moment of reflection where all of a sudden we had to ask, is this really the best path forward? So we began briefings on this issue on the Hill. The New York Times recently profiled some of the work that we did from February onwards, and started really diving into what is IVF, what are the concerns that it poses, is it actually the best path forward to addressing infertility? And so from there, one of the things that really struck me is that when we would start talking about IVF, what people would oftentimes hear is, let's talk about whether or not you're allowed to have babies. And it quickly became this very personal fight about, can I have a child, or are you telling me you're going to take away my right to have a child? Which was in no way the grounds of the conversation, right? But it's so personal that it quickly reached that point. And the resulting conversation could quickly become tense, emotional, and frankly, pretty unproductive. And this is, of course, not what's being said, but it can feel like it. And that is why it's so important in policy and in law to ask ourselves, what is our goal? Is it merely to expand access to IVF? Or is it a bigger goal, which is to help men and women treat the root causes of their infertility and have the children that they desire? And while maybe similar in some ears, this question is key when it comes to shaping our policies and our response to the issue. And so, of course, I'm pro-life. I imagine most of you here are very pro-life. And so the question isn't, do we want more babies or do we value babies? Because of course we do. And that is precisely why we care about helping couples have the children that they desire, while also prioritizing the well-being of mothers and their unborn children from the embryonic stage. We have a duty to ensure that our laws protect the most vulnerable, and this topic was no different. And I think it's easy when we're talking about IVF to think about potential children, right? Egg and sperm are just the gametes. You place them in the laboratory dish, sperm fertilizes egg, and in about 80% of cases, an embryo is created. Now, I like to joke that in fertility clinics, there is no sex confusion or gender confusion whatsoever. From that very early moment, doctors can look at the embryo, analyze it, and know whether that is the embryo is going to grow into a man or a woman, if possible. It's incredible. So that is at its most basic what IVF is. And IVF accounts for about 99% of all assisted reproductive technology procedures in the United States. So as we started these briefings, we would cover many of the topics, or like the top line details. So a round of IVF, which is the process of extracting the eggs, the sperm, creating embryos, can cost anywhere from $12,000 to $30,000 in the United States. And on average, it costs about $61,000 to achieve the live birth of a child or give up. So there's an incredibly high cost associated with it. And on top of that, there are many profound errors with how IVF is practiced, in many cases amounting to eugenics. So in more than 75% of fertility clinics, they offer something called pre-implantation genetic testing. And 73% allow it for the use of sex selection, which means they not only look at the embryo and analyze its sex, but they also analyze its potential health. And in companies like Orchid that have recently launched on the market, they're not only looking at typical markers for health, but over 1,200 conditions. And then in addition to that, IQ and even personality in some cases. And giving parents the option to choose what kind of child they want. Do you want a boy? Do you want a girl? Are you choosing for kindness or a competitive edge? Are you concerned about this set of diseases, perhaps deafness, which, as you know, is easily treatable with modern medicine, and yet there are many on X who have talked about choosing a child, not choosing a child because it had the potential to be born deaf. And that's the direction that so much of this industry is pointing towards. It's not simply helping couples have the child they desire, but helping them have a certain kind of child, one that completely flies in opposition to the ethos of the pro-life movement. And when we're talking about IVF, about 2.3% of all infants in the United States are born from IVF every year. And this is based on 2021 data, which is our most recent year. To date, over 1 million babies have been born using IVF, and another 1 million embryos are frozen in liquid nitrogen freezers in the United States alone. And yet, when we are considering the total number of live-born infants compared to the number of IVF cycles, we find that IVF only has a success rate of about 23 to 25%. And that's taken overall. For women who are 40 and older, which is a large part of the demographic, the success rate is 10% or less, which means that if you're relying solely on IVF to have a child, especially as you get older, you're looking at very, very difficult odds. But what these numbers do not include is the total number of embryos that are created. No federal or state database tracks the number of embryos created in the United States. And the success rates that we have only look at the number of embryos that are implanted in the womb, not the total number that they create. And in many cases, IVF clinics are trying to create as many embryos as possible to give them the most options to choose from and implant at a time. And so based on a very rough back of the napkin estimations that we have, what we have estimated is that for 413,000 rounds of IVF reported in 2021, if an average of 10 embryos were created, which is a fairly solid average for the industry, then we're looking at 4.1 million embryos created in 1 year in the United States. 4.1 million boys or girls, human beings, right, at that earliest stage of their development. And yet, of those 4.1 million embryos, only 2.3% of those embryos are born as live children in the United States. And based on some studies from the United Kingdom, which suggests that only 7% of embryos are in place, and other studies that Live Action has put out that said that maybe as many as 10% of all embryos created are born, you're still looking at a failure rate of 90% or more for the embryos of IVF. And so for those of us who are pro-life, this becomes a central tenet of the pro-life fight, beyond abortion, to the question of how are we treating the truly the most vulnerable, the smallest among us, in our very understandable pursuit for a child, how many are perishing along the way. And I want to be very, very clear. This is not demonizing people who have used IVF or have struggled with infertility. Without a doubt, there are many good people who use IVF and do so without destroying embryos and with the best of intentions. But as we talk about life, one of the questions that I keep coming back to is is this really the best way to treat infertility? Or is there a better way? And that's the point I hit very quickly in 2024. We spent many hours briefing members of Congress and staff about IVF, its risks and concerns, but we kept coming back to the same thing, which is if you're sitting across from a family who's struggling from infertility, they're going to choose the option that gives them the best chance at having a child. And maybe in the best circumstances, choose not to destroy embryos and use all that they create, but they're still going to rely on the mechanism that provides the best outcome. So what if there's a better way? And this is where we really came into contact with restorative reproductive medicine and began researching in depth the options available for root cause treatments for infertility. So the best pro-life policies are those that champion the entire family, not just from the moment of conception, but the lifelong health and well-being of parents and children alike. And so while Americans broadly support access to IVF, polling conducted earlier this year with JL Partners reveals something surprising. Most Americans want more than IVF. 79% of respondents said they wanted personalized precision medicine that identifies and treats the root causes of infertility, either prior to or alongside IVF. Similarly, 89% of respondents said it was important for couples struggling with infertility to tailor their treatment plans to their medical and reproductive health. And for far too long, the conversation about infertility in America has been dominated by a false equation that IVF equals infertility care. And as it is now, IVF takes up all the oxygen in the room, overshadowing other approaches that can help couples build families. But what if infertility care is bigger than IVF? And what if there are other ways to restore fertility and improve health in the process? And that, as I said, is where restorative reproductive medicine comes in. This is a medical approach that diagnoses and treats the underlying causes of infertility. Conditions like endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, blocked fallopian tubes, and hormonal imbalances in women, and low sperm count or low sperm motility in men, and recurrent miscarriages between the couple. And instead of bypassing the body's dysfunction, restorative reproductive medicine works to correct it, restoring the natural fertility and optimizing overall reproductive health. And the benefits are compelling. There are no ethical concerns over the creation or destruction of human life because conception remains in the womb with the couple. There are better maternal and neonatal health outcomes. It includes comprehensive whole body care that improves the quality of life, not just the pregnancy odds, because it actually works to heal the body, not just create a child. And the costs are significantly lower than IVF, with about comparable success rates from the studies that we've seen. In fact, studies have found that women who have undergone 1 to 9 failed cycles of IVF still have a 32% chance of conceiving with restorative reproductive medicine, and that's later in their life. And this is a game changer for American families, and is exactly the kind of pro-family innovation that voters say they want. So when it comes to our work in this space, we realized that the only way to improve upon a poor technology was to introduce a better option. So that's when we developed the Restore Act, which was introduced in 2024 and in 2025 in Congress, and have begun working with lawmakers to develop innovative root cause treatments for infertility. This is where the MAHA movement has come alongside as one of the best partners with the recent MAHA report diving deep into ways that we can actually promote holistic fertility care. And in Arkansas in this year, 2025, they actually enacted their first state-level Restore Act, which is promoting restorative reproductive medicine for Americans all across the state. So we have model legislation addressing this, a number of research briefs diving into the topic, and it's become one of the best things that that I have to offer through my policy platform at Heritage, because it's not only addressing the issue of infertility and the issues with IVF, but it's actually offering families a better way forward that restores their health and helps them pursue the children that they desire. And I think that's one of the best things that we can offer to the men and women of the United States who are struggling with this issue. Thank you.
I was wondering if companies like Orchid that do the pre-implantation screening, you mentioned that they claim they can screen for things like personality. Is there any indication that that's actually reliable?
This is a very good question. So, Chris asked, is there any indication that this technology is reliable? This is something we've been doing a deep dive into through our biotech working group at Heritage. And the short answer is that what ORCID does is they take typical pre-implantation genetic testing models that clinics across the United States have access to, and then they up the game by using they've sequenced the entire human genome, and I'm trying to think how to explain this. Basically, they up the game by amplifying the results that they get from a biopsied embryo. So let me just restart. When you're doing pre-implantation genetic testing, you take an embryo, you remove a couple of cells from that early stage embryo, you biopsy those to try to understand the health outcomes, the sex, etc. They then amplify that, so they multiply those and say, okay, if you multiply this by 100, that should give us a good idea of the genetic health. And so the tricky thing is that ORCID has patented its model of actually testing for IQ and personality. And so they won't release that publicly. But the thing with a patent is that you patent it so no one else can steal it, but you can show them what you're doing. And so the fact that they're not releasing it publicly is suggesting to a lot of people that, the data doesn't add up. And there's a number of scientists way beyond the pro-life or like social conservative space who have really taken them, have really questioned the validity of it. The problem is that they're not actually then implanting all of those embryos to test if the outcomes are true or not. So some who have used this technology have said, oh, I selected my daughter to be more docile because I had really crazy boys. This is a true story. And she's like, look, my daughter is docile. But then it begs the question of, is your daughter docile because you told her you're docile and treat her as docile? Which it's just like a big open question, but they're not actually testing it to the full extension to know.
Any other questions? That the IVF, I think, was $61,000. Is this correct?
So if you that's in order to have a successful outcome, a live birth. So typically, the amount it costs for the live birth of a child is about $61,000. It typically takes around 2.5 cycles on average to result in the successful birth of a child. For younger women, it tends to be higher success rates. For lower women, it's lower success rates, but on average, about $61,000. Yeah, much less. So some work with insurance, some are just on a pay per month system, but the averages we've seen from restorative reproductive medicine doctors cap out the total process at about $8,000 at most. Some people only need hormonal supplements or charting, which is a few hundred to $1,000 or $2. Some people need surgery for endometriosis, which is where you hit the $8,000, maybe $10,000 for surgery, depending on if they're in network or not. But the thing that I think is so important to keep in mind is that with IVF, if you are successful in having a child, if you want a second child, you have to restart that entire process. So it is $61,000 on average per child. Whereas with restorative reproductive medicine, what you're doing is optimizing the health of the body for there on out. So it may be at most $8,000 to $10,000 to heal you and your partner's body, but then you're good to go. And you may need to continue sustaining your health with progesterone shots during pregnancy, but that's a few $100s. And then ideally, right, you're then free to have as many children as the Lord blesses you with, without that continual process.
Let's just take one more question.
Yes, what kind of support are you finding in the medical community?
So among APLOG and Catholic Medical Association and the International Institute for Restorative Reproductive Medicine, the Pope Paul VI Institute, a number of those who have practiced restorative reproductive medicine, lots of support. A number of the doctors in the Make America Healthy Again movement, those who are in integrative care, nutrition, appreciate the root cause approach, have been very supportive. And so we have a number of doctors who are in the world of RFK Jr. who are on board. But if you look at ACOG or some of the top fertility or medical associations in the United States, the AMA, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, they are losing their ever-loving minds over this topic. There have been more press releases, Instagram posts, letters to governors, letters to Congress, letters to the president, like on a weekly basis, saying that both restorative reproductive medicine is fake and doesn't work, And also, they already offer it, so they don't need to have restorative reproductive medicine. And so we'll just let that sit. But it's a really beautiful moment because the work we started here at Heritage was started by 2 women who were 25 and a member of the Arkansas House who's 27. And the biggest fertility organizations in America are losing their minds and millions of dollars over it. So it's pretty great. Thank you.